Alright, so you may be asking yourself, where does this quadratic formula come from? So first, let's keep in mind that the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, that's our quadratic formula. It looks big and disgusting and lots of variables, and where does it come from? Well, let's go back and consider that the standard form of a quadratic is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a, b, and c are not 0. So the quadratic formula actually comes from completing the square on this generalized formula. So if you remember the steps from completing the square, the first thing that we're going to do is subtract c from both sides. And that gives us ax squared plus bx equals negative c. Now, a very important piece of this is, if you recall from class, you can only complete the square when the a value is equal to 1. So let's just imagine for a minute that this is equal to 4. Okay, we would have to divide every single piece of this by 4. So I'm going to use that thinking, and I'm going to divide everything right now by a, just imagining that a is something other than 1 at this point. So if I divide every single piece of this by a, ax squared divided by a is x squared. Bx divided by a actually doesn't simplify at all, so that stays as bx over a. Same with the other side, this will stay as negative c over a. Alright, so that was step 2, is to divide out the coefficient if there is one. Now, if you think back to other lessons where you've actually completed the square, this is where we would go over to our sidebar and figure out what b is and half of b and square that. So what would this is our b value right here if we look at b over a as a fraction of coefficients. Okay, so the b value in this case, it looks a little weird, but it's really b over a. And then if I was to consider half of that, well, that would just be 1/2 b over a. Okay, and then the next step would be to square that. So if I do b over 2a and I square it, what I'm actually going to get is b squared over 4a squared. Okay, and if you recall, this is actually what I'm going to add to both sides of this equation to complete the square. So if I add b squared over 4a squared, and I add b squared over 4a squared. So this creates something kind of nasty, but that's okay for now. So this will be b squared over 4a squared, and that's going to equal negative c over a plus b squared over 4a squared. Okay, but if I did this correctly, this thing right here should be a perfect square trinomial. What are the things that would multiply to this and add to this? Well, it's right here. Okay, so this is going to be x plus b over 2a squared. Over here, I'm going to switch these around a little bit so that this is positive. So I have b squared over 4a squared minus c over a. Now, since I realize that these two are fractions with a subtraction sign, I'm going to remember that in order to actually subtract them, I need common denominators. The common denominator would be 4a squared. So what I'm actually going to do now is multiply this by 4a over 4a. And what that gives me is b squared over 4a squared minus 4ac over 4a squared. I wonder if you notice anything coming together yet. This is going to equal x plus b over 2a squared. Since these are common denominators, I can actually put this together. So this will be b squared minus 4ac over 4a squared. And this is x plus b over 2a squared. Okay, Well, in the completing the square process, now we're going to do the square root of both sides. That makes this x plus b over 2a. Over here, this is an expression, so I can't really do anything with it, keeping in mind the square roots have two answers. So this is going to be plus and minus. I'm going to leave it as the square root of b squared minus 4ac. But on the bottom, the square root of 4a squared is just 2a. Well, that's really nice because now I'm noticing the common denominators here. So I'm going to subtract b over 2a from both sides. So this will give me x equals. I'm going to put the b over 2a in front, so it's negative b over 2a plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And once again, since those are common denominators, I can actually put them together. So that's going to give me x equals negative b plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. There is the quadratic formula. Enjoy.